Welcome to 3 Point Cyber, a podcast about cybersecurity topics and events for the layperson. The ideas, opinions, and discussions of this podcast are those of the host, co-host, and guest and do not necessarily represent the views of their respective employers or affiliates. Recording and propagation of this podcast is highly encouraged as long as an acknowledgement is given to the ownership. Music and graphics used in the podcast and promotional materials cannot be used in other events not tied to the podcast without the express written consent from Alpha Omega Advisors. Three Point Cyber. We are going for episode number 9. I can't believe we've done that many already. Andrew, you're there and you're still in Poland, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've lost count. I can only count up to 7. So after that, it's
you shouldn't have lost those fingers. Anyway, I'm really excited about this podcast, because we've got a guest here that I'm really looking forward to interviewing and talking with. I'm decided to do something a little bit different with this particular episode. I have been a long time outspoken person on cyber education, specifically with universities and colleges, and how I think most of them are not doing it correctly. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and what my thoughts are on that. I've seen a lot of changes in the cyber field over the last 10 years, specifically with the type and quality of people coming out of the programs and how the universities have changed. Several years ago when I did my master's, I could count on both hands the number of universities that had master's programs. And now almost every university you talk to has a master's program in cybersecurity. So that's what's really changed a lot.
Well, is that for the better or the worse?
Well, I've found it both ways. I found it really good, and I've found it not so good. What I've found is that a lot of them that are coming out, the students that are exiting the master's programs are thinking they are ready to start off right off the bat with a company at a higher level of pay, and that's just not the case.
Yeah.
To me, if you're getting...
I got a funny story about that.
And we'll get to that. To me, if you're coming out with a master's degree, you should be showing some really good proficiency in the topic. And when I would bring in people with masters and they would just right out of the program and they had zero field experience, I found that we almost have to retrain them in a lot of things to get things done correctly. So
my personal feeling is that a master's degree, part of getting into a program should be experience. I don't think anybody should go from a bachelor's right into a master's program, because holding a title of master should mean something.
It should, and I think along with a master's program should indicate some level of experience. I think really going directly from a bachelor's to a master's is not a good thing. I think there should be some work experience that should be done in there, whether it's internship or whatever, and then begin working on your master's. Same thing with PhD. You're going to go on and do PhD in this field, you're going to have to do some groundwork, be out there and get some experience.
Yeah, and people will expect you to know stuff, and if you're going right through those programs, and then get your first job, you're just not going to know what the credential suggests that you know.
Oh, I agree, and I tell you, I've been embarrassed for some of the interviewees that I've had where we've asked basic, simple questions in cyber and they can't answer the question, and we look at their resume and they have a master's degree in the program. So I don't understand how you could not know some basic fundamentals of cyber and be awarded a master's.
I read an article the other day about college graduate expectations regarding their first salary, and believe it or not, apparently over like 106,000 was the average of what a college, somebody who's getting ready to graduate college expects to make in their first job. $106,000 a year.
That's pretty high expectations. I will say though that Cyberfield is paying a pretty good price for cyber people because we're so short in them. But that doesn't mean that you're going to come right on in with a degree and demand that kind of a figure. Now, there may be some places that are willing to bring you in at that figure as long as you're going to be with them for a while and you're going to be trained with what they want you to do. So you'd be very specific to that company.
Oh, yeah.
I think right now the average entry-level position, and it depends on what position we're talking about in cyber, because there's several of them, and we'll probably get into that for Trey in just a minute. But there's several different ways to go into cyber. Let's take an analyst position, for example. Depending on what part of the country you're in, the average entry position is anywhere from $75,000 to about $85,000 a year. quite honestly, that's not bad.
Yeah, well, depending on where you live,
depending on where you live,
75 to
right.
80 in New York City would be
right. But you also have to consider that is strictly entry level, and right now, one of the problems that I think the industry is having is that cyber has just kind of taken off everywhere. And with all of the threats that are going on and the attacks that are occurring on companies, the companies that are hiring, they're not looking for entry-level people. They need someone to come in and immediately hit the ground running. So that's probably one of the issues with the crisis that's going on in the industry. There's not a good population of experienced or highly experienced cyber people. They're more of the ones that are now getting through their bachelor programs and they're entering the field. I see it. I read it a lot on LinkedIn about frustrated individuals that are having a tough time. They've gone into the cyber field. They've gotten their bachelor's degree, and now they're ready to be hired. But every time they go for interviews, they end up saying that the frustration comes in. The company's looking for someone more experienced, which is a shame because I know there are a lot of good, qualified people that have gone through a program that are ready to hit the ground running, even though it may take about a 90-day period to come up on the ramp. I guess the difference, I would say, Andrew, would be between a really good cyber person and one that's not so good is that if you've gone into the field to learn and you're passionate about the field, you're going to do okay. It's those that are still unsure of whether or not they want to be in the field. So that might be one of the first takeaways that I would want Trey to know. You have to have a passion for what you're doing. If you do not really like the field you're going into, you need to think twice about going into that field.
Yeah. So probably at this point, we should introduce Trey, who's my nephew and your great nephew. I think we will have some pearls of wisdom to pass on that I'm sure he is anxious, sitting there anxiously.
Yeah, the very first tidbit of information there I want to, the wisdom, knowledge there, I want you to notice, Trey, that he said, "You're my great." Okay, so he doesn't consider you that. You're not so great to him. Just let's get that right out in the open. You mean a whole lot more to me than you do to him. So.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Before we get started, we're going to take this real short break, and then we'll be right back, and we'll have Trey on here. We're back now, Andrew, with bringing Trey on here, and I'm looking forward to this whole conversation. I think we're going to have some fun, and hopefully, as you mentioned earlier, give him some wisdom and help him make decisions about what he's going to do with his college career and his future career. So bring him on, Andrew. I'll let you introduce him here.
Okay. Well, as stated previously, Trey is my nephew, and I will pass it on over here to Trey. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience in life. And well, I don't want to say too much. I'll just let you introduce yourself here.
All right. So I am going into college for computer science, and I've taken about a year of that class so far. And my experience with the class has been decent. The teaching's been okay. There's only like one or two teachers that teach this specific course. But after going through this year, I've kind of wondered if cybersecurity is more for me. And I'm just kind of wondering what the difference between a computer science class and a cybersecurity class would look like.
Okay, well that's a good start. So as we peel back this onion, which we will do here, let's start back from why you made a decision to go into computer science.
Okay, so when I was looking at all my majors that I could possibly go into, obviously money is a big deal because you gotta have money to live life. And computer science, obviously that checks one of the boxes is money because as you guys were talking about earlier, the entry-level job, people were expecting 106,000 a year, right?
Right.
Which right. Yeah, I looked it up, and I think for me it said like 77,000 or somewhere around there. Which for me that's more than enough for a first job, you know.
Okay.
So that checked one of the boxes, and I am very into video games and stuff like that. And I think with computer science, I was kind of hoping that maybe I could somewhere along the line get into video games and maybe making them or like have an influence in them. But if not, that's cool. Maybe just like entering data for companies, something like that. That's kind of what I was looking for in computer science.
Okay. So in computer science, are you saying that you have a knack or an interest in data crunching, data analytics, looking at data, what it means and what it does?
Exactly. Yeah. Like data crunching, that sounds very interesting to me. I took a stat class in high school actually, and I think that's where like it started, maybe a little bit with football too, like looking at numbers, like specifically with like quarterbacks or like teams, being able to crunch those. I think with computer science, like in the stuff I've learned this year, I think I could definitely do some of that.
So are you able to look at data and see patterns?
Well, that's the goal. I'm certainly hoping like maybe with some more experience I can get better at it, but I think that's maybe something I'm good at first.
Well, so I'm going to be asking a lot of these different questions because that kind of leads into some of the areas that in cyber where you need to have certain types of skills to do that and a drive to do that. So there's purpose to the questions that I'm going to be asking, and that's kind of what I want to get through those. So you also mentioned you like the gaming, which is a huge industry in itself.
Yes.
And you don't necessarily need to have a computer science degree to get into the gaming field. It is obviously a computer-related field when you talk about software development, but I do know an awfully lot of universities out there and college programs that do nothing but programming for gaming. That might be something you might want to look into. And I know there's a couple of universities here in Florida that's what they have, programs that are doing nothing but animation and gaming type stuff, which I think is pretty cool. Now, the ones I don't really necessarily get into pushing, which, I may get a lot of hate mail for this one, and that's trying to make a career out of game playing. There's a lot of people out there that can make some really good money at gameplay, but to me, that's also like trying to win the lottery of getting into the NFL or the professional baseball. That's a very limited field.
And I'm going to throw something in here as well, talking about this. I almost compare it to poker. People, in a professional poker, well, you can make a lot of money doing that. Well, you can also waste a lot of time. Generally, the best of the best are the ones who make the money. Everybody else is treading water and having to work somewhere else. But to go along with that, and I want to just touch on beginning salary for the last time, not to beat a dead horse here. But when we're talking, say, $77,000, I'm going to assume that we're talking about the top of the class. So usually, when you graduate from a program, you'll be ranked. And the better you do in your program, the more people are going to be recruiting you, the higher the salary. So still, you got to do well in your studies, because if you come out on the lower end of your class, then definitely don't even expect to, look at the higher tier of those salary offers.
Yeah, I'll jump in on a little bit of that. I'm not sure I necessarily completely agree with you on this, Andrew. And the only reason I say that is because as I've gone through the last several years of looking at resumes and hiring people, I am not seeing very many companies go back into the background of your college ranking of where you are. They're really looking at, did you get the degree? When did you get the degree? Not even so much as where you got the degree from anymore. Do you have it? Can you confirm that you have it? You would not believe how many applicants a company will get where they've said they have the degree, and when the background checks performed, they never finished the degree.
Okay. Well, then I take that back. Just forget about your classes. As long as you, C minus, go for it.
So no, I'm not going to pull it that far back. I think it's extremely important to do as best you can, because where Andrew is spot on are those recruiters that are going to universities and looking for the top talent. And they're going to talk to your professors, and they're going to see how well you're doing in classes and what your drive is and your passion for the field is. So it does make a difference. Personally, I wouldn't pay as much attention to that as I would just doing the best I could of learning the topic, because that is where a lot of students are failing, is they're getting through classes and they're only doing it to get by. They're not really learning anything in the class. They're just getting it to get the grade to pass the class. And to me, that's a complete waste of an education and a complete waste of your dollar. If you're there to learn and be the best at what that topic is at the moment, which really goes into another area of cyber. And I mentioned earlier, there's so many directions you can go off into cyber. I do get questions from from students or potential people that would like to work with me and for me. And that has always been, what do I need to do? Where do I need to apply myself? And I've found way too often that too many they want to know everything about everything in cyber. And I'm telling you, it's such a wide field, it's impossible to know everything in cyber. And to try to master it all, which really means you're never going to be a master of anything. You're just going to be that jack of all trades. And sometimes there's good jack of all trades, and sometimes there's very poor ones. My advice is that you find a field in the cyber area and that really piques your interest, and then you concentrate on that particular area and you become an expert in that area. And I've found that no matter what area in cyber, if you become an expert in that particular area, you're going to be sought after and you're going to be worth your weight in what they pay you. That is one that I highly recommend to everyone, is don't try to master it all. get to the one you really like, and then be the best at that particular area. And if that's, if that ends up being software development, then you start learning everything you can about software development. If it's network, which there's networking in cyber, then you be the best network engineer you can possibly be. And that's kind of where I go with that. My area. I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I was gonna say that's really interesting. I don't know if it goes hand in hand with computer science, but would like the computer science, what do you call it? Like kind of like the same thing as like going into like instead of a jack of all trades, what I learned this year was JavaScript or just Java. So when like going into specifically Java be like the play for computer science?
It would be, as long as you're not limiting yourself to that particular language. And because that's something that's been around for a long time, but it's not something that's going to forever stay. And so you would end up being in an area where eventually those are going to be replaced with later technology, software languages, I guess I should say. Probably better to say the languages, because those do get replaced a lot. There's been work, in the JavaScript area for quite a while that's getting replaced by newer stuff. Right now I'm looking at Python is a huge one right now. You get a good Python programmer and you're going to be getting someone really good that can do a lot of different things for you.
So saying to become like an expert in like Python specifically.
If you're an expert in Python, you pretty much go wherever you want to go. There's always companies looking for Python developers.
Have you enjoyed your programming classes?
So far it's been pretty enjoyable. I've actually liked it more than I thought I was going to at first. I went into it knowing nothing, and I came out knowing, I would say I'm like decent at Java, like the beginning stuff so far. So
okay, so let me talk to you a little bit about the different areas that's in cyber. What kind of job you would be doing, because there's, again, as I mentioned, there's a wide range, but basically there's some very basic ones that everybody tends to go for and knows more of, and that's the security analyst. That's the person that loves the data crunching, the digging in and finding out what's causing things to do what it's doing. They're analyzing threats that are coming in. Those are the people we place in security operations centers. They look at the data. They're not the front end people that deal with users. They're usually the ones on the back end looking at all the data that's coming in and making sense of that data. And the data is usually potential threats that are hitting an organization and what to do about those threats and how to defeat them. Analysts are also those that are like tearing apart malware and figuring out how malware works. So something can be created that would prevent the malware from working. They're tearing apart the reverse engineering viruses and worms and things like that. I'm not sure if you understand what those are. Yeah, so that's that. You've heard of computers getting viruses, right? And so viruses, they're really nothing more than somebody's code that is intended on doing something malicious to the computer. Okay. And analysts take that information and they will reverse engineer the virus and figure out why it's doing what it's doing and what can be put into place to prevent it from doing what it's intended to do. Now, I just mentioned a very narrow view of what analysts do.
And Trey, do you know reverse engineering? Do you know what that means?
I do not.
Okay. So Dave, if you can.
So whenever you're sitting down and you're developing something in code, you're engineering a product. Okay, does that make sense? You're actually developing a product.
Yeah, like making your own.
Yeah. So when you're done with that, someone else can take that information and they can reverse engineer it. That means they're now tearing it apart to see what you did to create it in the first place. And that's part of hacking. That's actually where the hacking term comes from, where hackers got their name. They would tear things apart to hack it to see what they could do to make it do something different, or even make it even better than it is. So hacking has a really, unfortunately, has a negative connotation to it. But there's a lot. That's why we have a field called white hat hackers and black hat hackers. The white hat hackers are doing things for the good. They're looking at stuff to pull stuff out. And black hat hackers are typically known to those that are trying to do something very malicious. They're the bad guys. Okay.
We think of hackers as like the black hat hackers.
Yeah, that's what I mean. There's not necessarily, all hacking is not bad. In fact, you get better products when you have someone tearing it apart and intentionally trying to tear it apart. So those are the good hackers. And there's good money if you're a really good hacker. I can tell you that, but stay on the good side, please. That would make our job a lot easier if you'd stay on the good side. And then you've got what we call security architects. And basically, you're on the edge of a security engineer and a security architect. These are the guys that are actually doing development work, and engineering products to do something. So, at some point, a firewall is a product that goes into a network to help you manage the network. It is put into place to prevent things from coming in, to prevent things from going out, basically to filter your traffic for stuff that you want and stuff that you don't want. That's a very simplistic definition of a firewall, but a firewall had to be developed by someone. That's typically what an engineer does, their development. That's how they work. An architect is someone that'll take products like this and see an issue, and then they will architect something in place to take care of your issue with known products. That's specifically what a security architect will do. In my teams, I have a combination of people. I'll use a security architect, I'll use security engineers, and I'll use security analysts. And those are my three main go-to positions. And you'll see those in a lot of different ways with a lot of different types of job descriptions. Now, on the side of that is being more, within the last few years of really starting to come out on top, are penetration testers. Penetration testers, in my mind, are still the hacker type mentalities. They're the ones that actually go in and try to penetrate someone's network or penetrate the product to see where it's vulnerable. And penetration testers are getting to be very, very good. And they are specifically, to me, in my mind, and when I'm looking at them, if you got a really good penetration tester, you have someone that you can trust, and they're going to get premium dollar for their services. So penetration testing is a good area to kind of be going off into.
Okay. So Trey, do you have any questions about anything that was just said? And don't be afraid, because I have to ask questions all the time on these.
And I just covered a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that was quite a lot. So when you talk about the hacking, was that the security analyst, or is it like, how many jobs did you just break down?
I just broke down basically 3 jobs. Well, 4 if you count the penetration tester, the analyst. So the hacking jobs, it's a kind of a combination between an analyst and an engineer. You really have to understand what you're doing to do hacking properly. But even in that, you have different types of hackers. You have hardware hackers that kind of break into hardware and see how the hardware works. And then you have software hackers that is actually doing code work and reverse engineering code to try to see what they could do with it or something different. So as I'm saying, one of the things I'm trying to get you to understand is that you don't just enter cybersecurity. You're entering a range of positions in the cybersecurity field. And you need to explore which one of those is the highest possibility that you will enjoy doing, and that really just kind of, wow, I'd like to do that. Yeah. Because that's really where you want to focus on. Because if you really like to do something, you're going to learn. I mean, you want to learn about it. The worst thing in the world you could do would be to jump into cybersecurity and find out, okay, I really don't like this area, and then give up cyber altogether. Because that's the wrong way to take, because there's so many different areas. If you don't like what you're doing in cyber, go to another area of cyber and figure out something else, because there's so many different areas you could go into. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And I never knew that. I just thought when you go into cybersecurity, you like jump into cybersecurity, just as a whole thing.
And that's one of the problems that we're trying to figure out how to get out there in the public. It is not that way. Yeah, it is not that way at all.
It might teach at college, and I haven't paid attention, but I have not seen it.
You are not unusual in that thinking. I've actually had people ready to go come in with interviews, and they have that same thought. And absolutely. In fact, I hired a master's degree student that when he sat down in front of me, I said, well, tell me why you want to be in cyber. He says, because I just like everything about it. I like what it does. There are just so many things that I can do. And I said, well, what one thing do you want to do? And he couldn't answer the question.
Yeah, he just thought that it was all one.
And that's exactly right. And when my first counsel with him, I said, don't try to be good at everything in cyber, because there's experts in different areas, and eventually you're going to come across someone you are going to come across someone, even when you're an expert, you're going to come across someone that knows more than you. So don't ever go into a position where even though you are the expert in the room, think you are the only expert in the room. Okay. That's just another tidbit piece of information that I have that I've had to learn the hard way over the years, because my personality is I like to be the best, and very early on in my career, I like to be the best one in the room. And I learned the hard way that you can't do that.
I'll throw out my wisdom to you. And one of my passions in life is lifelong learning. And I think a lot of young people have an idea that they go for their college education and then they go to a job and learning's done. There's learning and then there's the job. And that is absolutely not true. You're going to be going through an education your entire life. Yeah. And you have to keep learning and keeping up with the latest developments. and trying to be the best.
Yeah, exactly. I won't mention my age, but I can tell you there is not a day go by when I'm sitting doing things like this or reading a book about cyber that I'm not learning something new. And I know that I'm never going to get to a spot where I stop learning. And if I do stop learning, I need to be out of the field. I need to quit doing what I'm doing. So don't ever think that just because you get through college, now your learning days are over, because they're just starting.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. The best part about getting out of college is that now you can go start applying your book knowledge, but your real learning experience begins when you start that job. It's not college. So I'm really going to inundate you here with other positions in the field that you might want to consider. So the other area that is becoming bigger than it ever has, and that's in the area of forensics, incident response and forensics. You know what forensics is? That's the science study of looking at why something happened and learning from it, right? Just tearing things apart and learning from it. My my concentration was in computer forensics, and that means tearing apart the computer and the code and the data and figuring out what happened and why it happened and when it happened, and keep that whole structure in place in case legal things have to be pulled out of it. That is another area that is increasingly becoming needed, specifically with all the ransomware events that have been occurring. So the forensic side of that is trying to make sense of malicious events that have happened to companies or individuals, right? That's one side of the forensic side. Then there's the other side of forensics, which is the fraud side. And that is when someone's been frauded using computers, then you have a computer forensic person that can come in and extract the right kind of data for investigation purposes. That's an area, if you like data analysis, forensics is an excellent area to get involved with.
I was going to say, that sounded pretty interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so those typically start off with analysts. Analysts get into that position. There's really another area that's heavily related to forensics, and that's the crime analysts and cyber investigators. So they're going in and looking at data and figuring out why things have happened and what can be done to prevent them from happening. So that's another area that you might really want to look at. And then obviously the big one that's taken off because of all of the threats and the ransomwares that are occurring, and that's the incident responder. Those are the people that typically they're not entry-level people, but you obviously have to have entry-level people to teach them how to do what the ones with experience are. An incident responder is the one that is on a team typically called a computer security incident response team, and they're going into companies that have been already hit by an incident, a ransomware or some kind of a malware event that's taken the company down or their network down. And the responders are going in and cleaning up and figuring out what's going on and how to get data recovery and all that back into the companies.
Okay, I got one question, and it might be a question for later, but what kind of companies need these types of jobs? Like, what kind of companies would you apply to?
Oh, for that particular work, you're looking at what's called managed service providers, managed security service providers.
But what kind of I'm talking if I wanted to go into somewhere like Madden or like EA, would I be able to apply there for that type of job, or is that a job for a different company?
So those are usually jobs that are third party. Anytime companies some companies do have internal incident response teams, but those are typically large companies that can afford that resource. Other than that, they are third party companies that you would hire when you had the incident.
I see. Okay.
So one of the top companies out there right now for this kind of work is called Mandiant. That's their name, is Mandiant.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. And then another area, if you really don't like much of the technical side, not saying you don't need to know the technical, but an area that is in high demand are IT auditors and cybersecurity auditors. They're the ones that are going to go in and do risk assessments for companies. That means they ask lots of questions, gather a lot of data from companies to determine where they are in their risk. Are they at a high risk because of computer issues and things that they're not doing? Or are they at a lower risk because they are doing things correctly? So IT auditors and risk assessment people is another whole field in cyber. What other things can we talk about here?
What's the difference between managing and working cybersecurity job?
So basically everybody that starts off in the cyber field traditionally have been IT people. They started off in IT and then they kind of worked their way over into cyber. I've been around for a long time, and I started off basically I did computer programming, I did computer work. I started off in operating systems that were Unix for the government, and then I eventually went over to do computer security stuff. The difference is the tech side. You need to understand technology really well to to get into the IT field, obviously you need to know how computers work if you're in IT, or networks, things like that. How you need to understand how software works. That's the tech side. That's actually the hands-on work. When you end up going into the management path, there will be a point in your time where you start getting less hands-on because you have people doing that for you. You're managing their work. So that's as simple as I can make it. There are some management and some director levels that are technical managers, technical directors that still do hands-on. But for the most part, when you start going down the management route, you're not doing the hands-on stuff. So,
and I will tell you that on the management side, you will, according to the workers, you will always be wrong. And that's because managers manage resources, and every place you work has limited resources. So it's manager's job to, determine what the focus areas are and where they're putting resources into.
Yeah. And that might be a better way to put it, that when you get into management, you're really managing the resources, and you're ensuring that your people have the right resources to do what they need to get their job done. And I will say that's, in my career, that's one of the things that I probably missed the most after I started going, into higher level management, making it to the CISO level. I really missed hands-on work, but I also realized that I have to do it somewhere, even if it is in my own setup lab, because technology changes so fast that if you're not staying on top of it, you will miss out. So you have to stay up with it. So that's an area about technology that you need to realize, that it changes fast. And as I was mentioned earlier, you become an expert in something. That means now we're tying in what we also mentioned that continuous learning takes in. Does that make sense?
That does, yeah. I got you.
All right. Anything else you'd like to know? Because I got some questions for you, too, that I'd like to kind of go through.
That was the last one I had on that subject. You can go ahead.
Okay. Now, for the audience purposes, I'm not intending to put Trey on the spot. I'm just going to ask him some questions that I think is kind of interesting, because there's generation gaps here that's on this podcast. I have 6 children myself, but my range of children, I range from Trey's age to mature adults, I should say. My oldest son is 38. My youngest son is 19. So I can, honestly, with my children, I feel like I have about I think there's 2 generations that are in just my children. So, and I've seen differences in the way my oldest one, in the way he was thinking about college when he went, to where my youngest one's now going to college. And the thinking is just completely different right now. Talking about that, when you started deciding for college, what pushed you to want to go to college?
Well, the idea was given to me by my parents.
Okay.
But the reason that I wanted to go to college was because I know that after a college degree, that's what makes you more money when you get into the job field.
Okay. All right. So it is a little bit money driven.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Money driven, parent driven, friend driven, because your friends are going to college too.
Okay. So peer had a lot to do with it as well then, right?
It did, yeah.
Okay. What were your expectations when you stopped high school? What were your expectations like going to college?
Well, I was expecting to learn a lot about how to live by yourself. I thought it was kind of going to be the same as high school, like in the classes scheme of things. I don't know. I didn't think it was going to be too different.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only thing that's going to be different is who you're going to be living with and how much free time you have. And that was a big difference, because you do have a lot of free time. And
mom and dad not around tell you to do what you have to do. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a lot of you have to do it yourself. Yeah. That was one of the, in the first semester, that was my biggest problem, was I didn't manage my time well enough.
Mm-hmm. Did you find the classes at college challenging, more difficult than high school?
I think the classes, it's really about the same, except for English. They require more pages to write. But I think it's really about the same. It's just you have more time to do your homework. So they give you more. It's more like you got to do it by yourself more than they teach you for 8 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I mean, to me, that's one of the benefits of college, too, that I enjoyed. And that was learning wasn't just sitting and listening to the professor. You had to go out and actually do some of it yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I tell you what, that is a good skill to have, is if you don't know an answer to something, at least you know enough to where you need to go look for it. And I think that is an excellent skill to have. So, Andrew, you got any questions?
Can you run down your classes? What are your classes right now?
And you're in your second semester?
Yeah, I just finished my second semester. Yes, sir.
Good.
I got pre-cal and computer science, econ, English, and then I have 2 online classes. But yeah, I took 19 hours of class this semester.
Well, that's a pretty good load. In these classes, are they, and probably not yet, since you're just getting into it, is it pretty much just staying in class I know you're doing a lot of extra work outside, but are they bringing in outside people to kind of talk to you as well in these classes?
Yeah, it's actually interesting you said that because we had like an intro to college class in our first semester, and they actually did bring in a lot of outside people to like tell us about the computer science field. But other than that, like in my computer science class, they don't bring anybody like guest speakers or anything.
Yeah, see, now there is the segue into what I was mentioning earlier when I started, where I have a heartburn with how colleges and universities have been trying to produce cybersecurity people. I think there's a huge opportunity out there that is being missed big time at colleges and universities with the local companies that are in the towns, specifically when it comes to cyber. What I'm finding is I don't like to retrain or have to train a new graduate coming into my security program basics of cybersecurity. And the only way that I think the students are going to get that is through partnership roles with companies that are in the location and through internships, where you're actually bringing someone from the company or the cyber team from that company into the classroom and showing them real world stuff, or having days where the students themselves in the program are going to the companies and sitting with the cyber teams so they can see what's really happening. And I think that's what's missing right now in the whole thing.
I totally agree. That'd actually be really helpful.
Everybody I talk to is like, yeah, I wish we had something like that, but I'm not seeing anybody out there actually making that effort, and it's disappointing. So, anything else? Andrew, you got anything you'd like to bring up?
As something to put in the back of your brain, that even if there's not an internship program, if you look around and find a company in the area and walk in there and tell them who you are and say, hey, can I don't know, get coffee for y'all? I mean, and to be able to sit down and kind of intern yourself kind of thing.
Yep.
That may be a thing to possibly look at down the road. They'll always look at things like that very, very positively, when you graduate.
So here's another final thing that I'd like to make a recommendation to you, Trey, if you continue to go down, and I hope you do enter the cyber field, because I think there's some areas in there you would probably really enjoy, and we need people in there really bad. And again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. You have to find something you really are passionate about and make sure that you are interested in it. Don't go into something you halfway think you're interested in. I think you're going to find that's more often than not going to be a waste of time. So if you've got any interest in any field of cyber, and that's the field you need to start honing in on. So when you're out there looking for, and I know you're still a few years away to start doing the job searching for this, but here's what I would suggest as you're doing as a student. I would go ahead and look for the local companies that are close to where you are and seeing if they have any type of volunteer programs where you could be going in and sitting with their teams, even on a volunteer basis, just to get the experience of what they're doing. That goes a long way in resume building. I can guarantee you I will pick a potential employee out of a resume stack if I'm seeing what they're currently doing while they're doing schoolwork. If they're not doing anything but schoolwork, I can't necessarily penalize them because they're doing their schoolwork, but that's not showing that little extra mile. It's not showing me that you have that drive to want to do more. Even if it's get involved, if there are any clubs on the university that is doing cyber hacking clubs or programming clubs, get involved in those clubs and learn from the other people that are doing that, because that's extracurricular activity in our field that we look at.
Okay. What year do you usually look at it? Like if I were to start doing that my junior year or versus senior year, does that make a difference?
I think it would make a difference for you personally, because I think you would be very disappointed to know that once you started it, you would have wished you would have done it sooner. So I would say sooner the better.
So even sophomore year.
Yeah, even sophomore year. Get through your freshman year, make you understand what direction you're going in, and then start in your sophomore year, start looking for those clubs and those volunteer or even internships. Internship does make a big difference when you're starting entry level, and companies are looking at that. Okay. The only other thing I would say is just try to do what you can in Googling your field and staying up with the latest trends in technology. You're going to find that people in the cyber industry like to talk about their industry, and the more you can converse with them about current events and what's going on, the better off it is. You learn how to talk their jargon really quick, and you start learning their technical language. So Trey, I've really appreciated you taking the time here and talking to us about this. And I think if we're still running the podcast here next year at this time, I'd like to have you back on to see what progress is going on and what you're doing. And maybe you can teach us a little bit about something that we didn't bring up this first go around.
Maybe, who knows? Well, thank you for having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, we're back for our 3-point session. We're going to talk about what we covered with Trey. Really good conversation with him, Andrew, I think. I think he's starting to get on the right track, and I think he's just kind of feeling himself out and what what his interests really are.
Definitely, he's still young, but even at, he's at the age where he will have to start making some major decisions. And like you, I do hope he pursues this field.
Yeah, I do too. I think there's several areas that I think he would be decent at and get really good at. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He's thinking the right way. I do caution anyone going into college at a young age not to think about it as how much money can I make. I think that's a trap everyone tends to fall into, and I think that's just a wrong way to go about picking your topic for college.
Absolutely. I know that that may be an answer for somebody who doesn't know their passion yet. That may be where he's at, and that's just a stock answer for people who are still trying to figure things out.
It could be. So let's grab some 3 points that you and I have pulled out of this thing. I think it's some pretty good information, and I'm hoping that someone can take some good takeaways from this. So I'll let you get started here, and we'll do what we normally do.
So I would say the first thing that I would take away is the need for experience, and getting that experience during your bachelor's program, and in particular before entering a master's program.
I would agree. And what we're referring to there is not that we're talking about you need experience to get into the field. What we're trying to get across to those that are just starting in the cyber field in college is that it's very, very important that you don't limit yourself just to your college classes. You need to grab some experience, whether that be in internships, whether you're going to volunteer for someplace, or you're going to go work part-time at a cyber company or something in the field while you're taking your classes. It's really important because as you're going through your program, you need some practical hands-on stuff that a lot of the colleges are not providing during their curriculum. And that's what we're referring to here, especially when it comes to don't jump directly from your bachelor's to your master's. I think it's really important for you to go get some experience between your bachelor's and master's just because of the title of the master's. I mean, you can't be a master at something if you have no practical experience in it. So that's kind of what we're referring to when we're looking at experience.
The number 2 thing that I would take away is to have a passion and become an expert in your field. I would throw in that I think a lot of people expect the passion to always come first, and I don't think that's the case. If you determine to be an expert in something, you can also develop a passion afterwards.
I agree. Again, to me, this is probably one of the more important points that we're going to bring out of this. I hate to see someone go through years of college, a few years of work, and then decide they really don't even like what they're doing. And I think what you need to do is develop a passion for what you're doing. And I think that is more important when you're making a decision of what you want to do for a career. Do you like doing what you're doing? If you don't like doing what you're doing, you're going to work every day of your life. If you love doing what you're doing, you're not going to work. You're doing what you want to do and you love to do it. And as you mentioned, Andrew, you develop a passion for your field. I can say that when I went into computers, electronics, I really loved electronics. Had I known that it was going to lead me into the computer field, I don't know at the time if I would have really made that same decision or not. But as I moved into the computer field, I really started to develop a passion for it. And when it got into the security side of things, my passion really skyrocketed because I finally found something that I really enjoy doing within the computer field. So I think it's just very important. And the other thing that goes kind of along with that, be very careful in the cyber field because there's such a wide range of things to do. Don't be a jack of all trades in the cyber field, and don't come out of the gate expecting to be an expert. It's going to take you time. You're going to have to develop it. So what I'm saying is find the one thing inside the cyber field that you really like to do, maybe even if it's 2 things, but try to focus on that one or 2 things and become an expert at that. And you're going to have a satisfying and successful career. But if you try to be an expert in all things cyber, you're going to find real quick that you're just going to be a jack of all trades and not an expert.
Yeah, I've heard that the general rule, at least in the professional fields, is that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert in any one particular field. And you break that down, 2,000 hours a year for a normal work year, that's 5 years.
And that's full time.
Okay.
That's not taking time off. So yeah, it's a 5 to a 7 year stint to become an expert. Okay, number 3.
Number 3, I would say just keep learning. Make being a lifelong learner also a passion.
Yeah, you're never going to stop learning. And if you think you just got through college and now you're all set because you think you know it all, you're going to be in for a rude awakening because there's a whole lot more to learn. And every day that has gone by in my field, I think I can honestly pick out every day I've learned something new, and you continue to learn. And that just doesn't mean sit back and do your job and you're going to learn things. I mean, you also have to apply yourself in wanting to learn the new stuff that's coming out, because technology changes. It's said that tech changes every 18 months. I think in today's world, I think it's more rapid than that. It wouldn't surprise me if tech is changing every 14 months now, 14 to 15 months. It's rapidly changing that much. You got to be a lifelong learner, and you got to be ready for it. So I really enjoyed talking with Trey. I think it was a great one. And on our next episode, we're going to have 3 individuals on that are still in college, and we had a great conversation with them. They're all part of a hacking club at their university, and they're doing some great things, and we talk about why they did that and where they're going with their careers. So I think it kind of goes hand in hand with this one with Trey, and I'm really, really excited about it, and I really thank Trey for coming on. And I think, Andrew, we need to do a follow-up with him soon.
Yes.
Maybe after another year, letting him get some classes under his belt, see how he's doing. What do you think?
Absolutely. And develop more questions, I'm sure, during that time.
Yeah, I'm sure he will.
Because the advantage he has is having a great uncle in the field.
A great uncle,
to
yeah.
ask these questions.
Yeah, we know who the great uncle is, right? Well, Andrew, thanks again for your participation here and helping me out with this podcast. It's much appreciated. Thank you for listening to 3 Point Cyber, a production from Alpha Omega Advisors. If you have questions about this episode or have a topic for discussion or a guest you would like us to have on, please email us at 3pointcyber@gmail.com. That's 3, the number 3, point, P-O-I-N-T, cyber, C-Y-B-E-R, all one word, 3pointcyber@gmail.com. We encourage you to share this podcast with others. This podcast is owned and produced by Alpha Omega Advisors. The theme song was created by music producer Andrew Van Wert in Nashville, Tennessee. This is Dave Summit, and until next time, keep on learning.